When it comes to DC as a brand in media, its most common words associated is trendsetter or copycat. In its nearly 50 years of gracing the big screen, or at times the smaller screen, it would often either be something that would be inked in history, or something that would be questionable to why it was even made. Each decade has had a mark on DC, whether it was the 70s and 80s with the iconic big screen debuts of two of the biggest superheroes on the planet, to all the way to the 2010s, where it had a very unique, yet very chaotic approach to a shared cinematic universe. Following the success of their direct rival Marvel with its MCU, DC, funded by Warner Bros., chose to counterback with its own different yet surprising way to usurp the Red Block Company's line of heroes, countering with something that Marvel didn't have, a full roster of DC superheroes to explore. And after blazing a trail with a defining trilogy for The Dark Knight, it was time for the Man of Steel, no pun intended, to finally get a modern-day screen adaptation. Sorry, Brandon Ralph. As Warner Bros. Loosely kicked off their DC Extended Universe following the end of Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy at the start of the 2010s, this is After the Theater for Man of Steel. If you were to ask people on the street to name a few superheroes on top of their head, most times than not, Superman would be among those answers. In terms of his on-screen appearances, he's always had some representation throughout the decades before his 2010s appearance. Starting in 1978 when Christopher Reeves was the first major actor to portray him on the big screen in the iconic Superman the movie, and continued to play him throughout the 80s in a series of sequels. The character did take a long sizable break after the release of the fourth film, and while there were many attempts to bring back the character earlier on the big screen, it wasn't meant to be until the new century kicked off when we had a whole series based on the character before he became the hero on Smallville, and then finally a proper big screen return in Superman Returns in 2006. While the former may have been a bit too stretched out for some, it was still groundbreaking at the time to tell such a story throughout an entire decade. While for the latter, it sadly did not reach the height it was set out to do, as it was meant to emulate Reeves' take on the character from before, but sadly it failed to really do so in a substantial way. But actually during the same time period, Christopher Nolan successfully brought back Batman to the big screen in a new grounded take in 2005's Batman Begins, which garnered huge results by the time we got into its 2008 sequel. So by that time, Warner Bros. Decided to move focus from developing a Superman Returns sequel into now an overall reboot for the film character. David S. Goyer also at the same time period had an idea how to bring a modern day Superman movie to life, so he and Christopher Nolan pitched the idea to the studio, and they were so pleased with it that they decided to move forward in that direction. Now, needing a director to helm this new vision of Superman, they looked at tons of directors, even coming close as Matthew Vaughn, backed by Mark Miller, to produce a whole new Superman trilogy. However, it was then decided to be Zack Snyder, hot off a Watchmen adaptation, to helm a new Superman film into the larger atmosphere. And to bring that new take to life was Henry Cavill, who had different earlier reaches for the character in 2002's canceled adaptation and in 2006 Returns. The core four were locked in and set, working throughout the beginnings of the 2010s to usher in a brand new era for DC film following the release of 2012's The Dark Knight Rises, as The Man of Steel took flight in the summer of 2013, only in theaters. We begin decades ago on the planet of Krypton, just weeks before its fated destruction, as Jor-El and Laurel gives birth to their son Kal, the first naturally born Kryptonian in centuries. As during the same time Jor-El, attempting to launch a final attempt to guarantee the future of their people beyond their world, is interrupted as General Zod and his forces arrive to attempt the coup on their planet. As his plan is to relaunch Krypton into a new era by his design, Jor-El manages to escape the onslaught and acquire the MacGuffin item, the Codex, which contains all the planned future Kryptonians to come. He quickly shoots the Codex and his infant son off planet to Earth in hopes of keeping their future alive. When we get to the present day, Kal-El, now called Clark Kent, embarks on a journey of self-discovery to find his true heritage and destiny as Zod arrives on Earth to continue his plan for their race's future. The story itself in total, I found to be structured very well to all audiences, leaning towards more of a dual identity story for Clark and an origin story for Superman. This is the first theatrical origin story for the character since 1978, and this including Smallville for a moment, having a brand new big screen take for him was needed after 35 years since the last one. This take overall was a bit different. As stated before, this wasn't just Clark becoming Superman, but becoming himself and understanding his destiny to bridge the two worlds together. With that said, the segment on Krypton, Clark's pre-Superman journey, and then the core conflict of the film could have worked as an even tighter focused story had it not been for certain side characters, or heck, even split off into two films. It's a good thing to want to develop an intriguing piece of time that the audience wants to see more of, but on the opposite end, cutting it back a bit short was left wanting more of it. For a rare instance here, I do want to shout out some of the aspects of the production making of the movie, which I think does help to deliver this film to a much more better quality than some might say. The score by Hans Zimmer was amazing, truly delivering still, to my opinion, the best Superman score we had since the original. The action moments were enthralling to get into as the viewer, even if the CGI might have been done a little bit too much during the penultimate moments of the film, yet it still looked really solid looking back over a decade later. As well as some solid cinematography that really helped some of the iconography for the future to remember this film by. Back into the actual film, Henry Cavill has to get a lot of credit for putting in a lot of work into the character. The physique alone is respectful to say. Where I think is where in the overall spirit to why Cavill's take never got his true stride was, as an origin story, it chose to focus more on Clark and Kal-El, definitely bringing down the focus away from the Superman portion of it. He may have the abilities and the suit, as well as being dubbed Superman, he never really fully earned the title in my opinion. This being his first real public outing, I can give him some slack for not having the full hero style packed down yet. I would have loved it if we got in a little montage of him going out in the world and trying to be a protector and hero before we get back to Zod. Sticking to the Clark and then the Kal-El sides here, it was well done looking into Clark's upbringing and later learning the first embers of being Kryptonian. Getting to see the raw and understandable reactions of him having to figure this all out himself. As a kid, a young adult, and then to now. It brought up an interesting opposite by the time he went head to head with his own people, which was all Jor-El ever wanted, to give him that different upbringing to gain something that Kryptonians never learn in their home world, and that gives Clark a more of a weight to being the change needed for the world. Normally I would kick off the spoilers section talking about the main villain and the crucial moments from the tail end of the film, but I wanted to start out by saying was, besides Clark Kent, I don't think any true purpose was given to service Lois Lane or any of the other secondary characters in any capacity. I'll even say that nearly all the secondary characters, worst of all, had little to no purpose besides providing some extra different faces to not all just be about Clark Kent. Lois's part of the film, I will say, was somewhat serviceable to be the bridge between the Kryptonians to Earth in terms of the discovery portion of it, but that shortly ends when Zod transmits his message to the entire world. After that, she really didn't do much besides be the outside his inner circle relationship that Clark has, be more as an ally, in which it was baffling to me that their entire kiss moment towards the end of the film was just not earned. This would have worked better had it been a slow burn throughout the films, considering what the story was trying to present here. There is no earned chemistry here between these two characters. If they had cut that out and showcased straight to her final moments with him in the film, it would have been a much better presentation. What we would have had a better presentation too was not to have too many of the other side characters, having Lois's Daily Planet acquaintances and the US Army folks not take up too much of the runtime. We could have had much more of what we actually wanted to see, or even a bit less of that bloated runtime. I love Lauren Fishburne and Richard Schiff from other projects, but here it was kind of a waste of their time. We got too little of them when we should have had more time somewhere else, or not at all. I get the need of having a breathable, expansive world for Clark to be a part of, but when a good chunk are killed off in a really not build-up sacrificial moment to the other just to have names to people as the destruction of Metropolis was unfolding, the ideas were there, but the execution was not. As by this point, it seemed like Man of Steel was just 3 separate films rolled into one. Finally, on to the villains of the story, General Zod, which ironically I somewhat mini-reviewed before in my The Flash review from last time. Here being the full take on the character, I liked the performance, but it wasn't a deep momentum to the character. We do get some character motivations from him in the intro and his first meeting with Clark. Michael Shannon does a good job portraying the character and really acting like the immovable vision of what Kryptonians can be versus Clark being the hopeful vision of what they could be. Besides him, he has Faora and his personal loyalists, which Faora does have a couple cool moments, but the rest of them were just mainly there for strength in numbers rather than having any usable purpose. Even the bigger looking Kryptonian had more purpose back in The Flash. To tie it all together, I'm aware of how much of a specific mark this film made to the perception of Superman, some saying it damaged what the character truly is, and some saying it was a new unique take that we should just accept. I'm torn on my own stance on it. But for the film itself, I'm more leaning towards the latter. I do agree this is a different path Clark is on with his heroics as Superman. This is relatively his first true outing at full capacity with his powers. When we had the moments when Jonathan Kent essentially in 2 different points to Clark's journey to becoming to who he wants to be at the moment he has to step up for what he should want to be. Relating to also what Jor-El wanted for him to become the bridge between the 2 worlds and showing them a better path forward. But the third perspective, despite one long period and then one brief period of channeling his destiny, he still has his own choices to weigh in and figure out where he could still go. His brief hesitation on not destroying the world engine to maintain some sense of Krypton to then the moment when he killed Zod. A huge departure from the normal for his character, but considering the realistic situation of life and death he's put into, I totally understand both in his thinking process and later reaction towards his decision. It's something that will impact him moving forward behind his mind, on whether he can truly be the one the world needs. It leaves him finishing the first steps of his journey and what he has left to go towards, which is what makes this particular journey more weighing to watch. However, I still don't understand how he got the Daily Planet job. Like, we had little to nothing indicating he should have even deserved to get that job. Man of Steel will probably live in a very particular place in the larger Superman film history, being strikingly different from its peers from the past and to later future. I will give it credit that it was trying to do something new in its direction compared to what we had gotten used to before, but sadly it was just held back by different factors that faltered it from where it was trying to reach at the end. But the film that we did gain in the end, it was the best in its time that featured Henry Cavill donning the S and having Zack Snyder behind the camera. I did enjoy the film, and a part of me wishes that I did get to see it back on the big screen when it first came out. But what I can say I really wish we did get was more of this specific corner of the universe, more about this specific take of Superman front and center. But however, sadly, history is history. Not much we can do about it. With that being said, I give this film my score of 3.5 stars out of 5, or my personal ranking of a large popcorn and soda. This has been Joe here from ActionX. Thank you so much for watching this episode of After the Theater. Please subscribe if you want to see more movie reviews such as this one. Please like, favorite, share this particular movie review because it would greatly help us out. Follow us on social media, and also ring the bell for a notification when our next video is live. But until we see each other again, thank you so much for watching this episode of After the Theater. Until next time, please stay safe out there, be good to each other, and as always, peace out.